teenagers often rebel against their parents. However, it's relatively rare that their rebelling leads to them disappearing off the face of the planet Earth. Unfortunately for Brittanee Drexel, that is quite literally exactly what happened. On April 25th, 2009, after going on a trip to Myrtle Beach with some of her friends for spring break, against her parents' wishes, she just disappeared out of thin air. Brittanee Drexel had the typical American home life before her disappearance, which eventually got the FBI involved to hopefully find her, even though the case itself had very, very few suspects. But, she was 17, she was in high school, and she literally had her whole life ahead of her, which makes her a great victim. So like I said, she had the typical American high school life. She was from Chile, New York. She played soccer. She had a boyfriend of 3 years named John Greco, and things were really going great for her. However, in the middle of her high school career, her parents announced that they were getting a divorce. So this divorce between her stepfather and her mother did eventually lead to Brittanee getting diagnosed with depression, which is not untypical for, anyone. Everyone struggles with mental health. But she was able to overcome these things and really overcome her depression, and she was very interested in becoming a cosmetologist, and she was making her way down that road. Generally speaking, she really did have the typical American home life, and as we can see in episode 203 of Morbid, The Disappearance of Brittanee Drexel, there's a lot that she was doing with her life. She was really taking the steps to become a cosmetologist and going through the motions of doing these things. Like the typical American teenager, she was really excited for spring break, and she wanted to go on this trip to Myrtle Beach. However, her mother explicitly said no, it was just too far. It was a 14-hour drive, and she did go with friends, but it was still 14 hours away. So if something had happened to her, no one would be there to really help her. And unfortunately, that is quite literally exactly what happened. Her friends had been bullying her the whole trip, which again we can see in episode 203 of Morbid. Her friends really just didn't care about her, and on April 25th, 2009, she was walking from her hotel to another friend's hotel. It was 10 minutes into her walk, and she was texting her boyfriend, and at 9:15, she just stopped. Everything completely stopped. And they couldn't find her. They couldn't find her phone or anything. However, in an article by Marco Margaritov on March 8th, 2022, it was discovered that her phone had pinged near a swamp about 35 miles south of where she had been kidnapped from. However, she still hasn't been seen since. And it really is unfortunate because she had gone to have a good time, and it just wasn't happening for her, and she had made that clear in her text messages to her boyfriend that this was not a good trip for her. She just disappeared off the street. Just gone, never to be found. And unfortunately, because there was really no evidence to back this up, there were really, really few suspects. And this led the FBI to get involved. The main suspect of the case was Timothy Deshaun Taylor, and Taquan Brown gave a story as a witness in 2016 after he had spoken to Taylor in prison. And the possible story was that she was taken to a stash house and she was sexually assaulted for weeks, and then eventually killed and fed to alligators in this swamp. Chad Drexel, her adoptive father, met Taylor actually when he was passing out flyers. And the only reason that we know this is because in the second episode that is covered on this, episode 204 of Morbid, Chad talks about how he had met someone while passing out flyers who was missing an arm, and that same person happens to be Taylor. The FBI believes that Taquan Brown's story is what actually happened. However, they are still offering a $25,000 reward for information, and there is a double jeopardy with Taylor that has been denied, and she unfortunately just hasn't been found to this day. So even though she disappeared out of thin air and they never found her body or anything like that, the FBI is relatively confident that the story that Taquan Brown gave them is probably exactly what happened. So unfortunately, even though Brittanee Drexel had a pretty decent home life, she just felt the need to rebel against her parents, which is not an unusual thing, but for her, it just led to very unfortunate consequences, and she just disappeared to never be seen again, and it's assumed that she was trafficked, possibly at the hands of Timothy Deshawn Taylor, but unfortunately, no evidence, no body. There's nothing to really try for. It's not going to hold up in court. And, no one deserves to disappear, but everyone deserves to be found, and Brittanee Drexel and her family really deserve the closure of finding her.